Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then I'll be very, very brief. As far as the issue of Palestinian deportation and the continuous settlement of Jews in the occupied territory are concerned, the government of the DPR of Korea expressed its consistent support to and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle to recover their national rights, including the right to return and self-determination. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, distinguished colleagues. We heard the last speaker, Oman. Okay, sorry. Oman has the floor. Is there any request for the floor? Turkey has the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, about the Article 112 of the background paper, I wish to inform you that this paragraph does not reflect the views of my country completely. We think that we don't need to question Palestinian state's authority over their territories in certain circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Your point will be taken note by the Secretariat. Is there any request for the floor? Indonesia. Indonesia has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Indonesia attaches importance on this agenda item. Indonesia strongly support for the independence and statehood of Palestine. Therefore, Indonesia complements countries in these two regions for supporting independence of Palestine. In the same vein, Indonesia would like to draw our attention to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution A/68/12 of 26 November 2013, which designated 2014 as the International Year of Solidarity for the Palestinian people. This particular resolution was aimed at boosting international support for the right of Palestinians to self-determination. However, this year we were taken aback of the events that have transpired, marked by extreme violence against Palestinian people. Mr. President, as long as the violence continues, the prospect of just and lasting peace between Israel and Palestinians will always be a distant horizon. Through an open letter, the President of the Republic of Indonesia has reaffirmed Indonesia's position in supporting the right of Palestinians to independence and statehood. The President is an ardent supporter of the two-state solution in creation of a peaceful region as a realistic concept. In order to attain such goals, the President invites the world community to work together to secure an independent Palestinian state, thereby to live peacefully side by side with Israel and with other neighboring countries. It is our view that ALCOS members must continue to assist Palestine in the necessary preparation for their eventual statehood. In this regard, Indonesia and Japan last March co-chaired the second conference on the cooperation among East Asian countries for Palestinian development. This conference was a consultative framework for Asian countries to consider effective assistance to the Palestinians by mobilizing their own knowledge and resource. Mr. President, Indonesia would like also to share that our former Indonesian ambassador to the United Nations, His Excellency Dr. Makarim Wibisono, was elected as the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories by the United Nations, by the United Nations Human Rights Council. To conclude, Mr. President, Indonesia wishes to express once again unwavering support of Palestinian people and their legitimate struggle for self-determination. I thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Iraq. Iraq has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, yesterday I couldn't have the floor to speak about terrorism. May I speak some words about that?
You can.
Thank you. I will speak in Arabic. إن العراق يواجه اليوم هجمة شرسة من الإرهاب، وأن الإرهاب قد تجاوز حدود العمليات الفردية أو المحدودة، وأخذ طابعا حربيا وعسكريا أشبه بالحروب بين الدول، وأنه تجاوز الحدود الدولية ليغطي مساحات لأكثر من دولة، وامتلاكه لأسلحة متطورة ومتعددة المصادر. وعليه نعتقد أنه آن الأوان لمواجهة هذا الإرهاب وتعبئة وتضافر الجهود الدولية لمواجهة خطر انتشاره، وأصبحت الحاجة ملحة لإصدار التشريعات والقوانين التي تواكب التطور النوعي الذي طرأ على أشكال الإرهاب، ومنها انتشار الأفكار المتطرفة والتكفيرية التي تشجع على العنف وقتل الأبرياء بسبب الاختلاف في المعتقدات الدينية. وكذلك نرى أنه من الأجدر تجريم ومحاسبة الدول التي تشجع على هذه الأفكار وهذه الممارسات التي يمارسها المجرمون بحق الأبرياء. شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you. The Secretariat would take note of the statement made by the distinguished representative of Iraq and recorded on the subject of terrorism. Okay. Is there any request for the floor? If I see none, I consider this agenda item to be closed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start our break, but however, in view of the time constraint we are facing, my advice is to continue with the next agenda item proposed by China and Japan on the cyberspace and international law, and then hopefully by 11:30 we will adjourn the meeting and go to the break, and at 12 o'clock we all depart from here to the Milad Tower. If agreed, I will continue to do so. Japan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Of course, I'm agreeable to continuing the discussion, but I just want to correct part of your statements saying that cyberspace was proposed China and Japan. Japan didn't.
Sorry, I correct myself. Okay, China has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese delegation welcomes the inclusion of the item International Law in Cyberspace proposed by China in agenda of this session. The 21st century is the century of the Internet, cyberspace. After land, sea, air, and outer space, cyberspace has become the fifth domain for human activities, and it has penetrated into every aspect of human life, bringing profound and unprecedented changes to our societies. It is in the common interest of the international community to make the best use of the opportunities brought by cyberspace and at the same time minimize the associated problem and risks. Cyberspace per se is a virtual space, but its participants come from the real world, and cyberspace exerts real efforts on the real world. Cyberspace also needs rules. In recent years, the issue of international law in cyberspace has drawn great attention from all sides. The international community has already conducted extensive discussion on issues such as state sovereignty in cyberspace, combating cybercrime, peaceful use of cyberspace, and application of international law in cyberspace, etc. Multilateral and regional forums such as the First Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, Third Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, International Telecommunication Union, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization have carried out various dialogues and discussions in this regard. In 2013, the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on Information Security, established by the UN General Assembly Resolution 66/24, reached general consensus on the applicability of the Charter of the United Nations of Cyberspace. The UN Group of Governmental Experts on Cybercrime, mandated by the UNGA Resolution 65/230, has held 2 meetings to examine options to strengthen the existing and to propose new national and international legal or other responses to cybercrime. In 2011, China, together with Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, submitted to the UNGA the draft International Code of Conduct for Information Security. The 4 countries are updating and improving the document, which aims at expounding the norms of the conduct in cyberspace through a voluntarily political document. However, clear and consistent international rules have yet to be set for cyberspace. In recent years, we have witnessed the rapid advance of the informatization in Asia and Africa. Statistics of Internet World Stats show that by the end of 2013, 50% of the world's Internet users are from Asia and Africa. Yet developing countries make up the majority of the 2 continents, and more than 90% of the non-Internet users are from the developing world. Therefore, the Asia-Africa region has even greater potential in the promotion of the Internet application and informatization. On the other hand, Asia-African countries still lag far behind the developed countries in such fields as Internet technology and governance, and are more vulnerable to cybersecurity risks. The region's participation and representation in international processes on cyberspace is far from sufficient, and its influence and impact on global Internet governance and the formulations of international rules for cyberspace is still regrettably limited. It's high time for Asian African countries to attach great importance to international legal issues in cyberspace and actively participate in cyber-related international processes, voicing their legitimate concerns and demands so as to improve their status and influence in global Internet governance. As the only intergovernmental legal consultative organization in Asian African region, it's of great importance for ARCO to end the issue of Internet law in cyberspace on its agenda. First, it facilitates ongoing and in-depth exchanges among Asia-African countries on international legal issues in cyberspace, which will help to promote regional and trans-regional cooperation and safeguard the common interest. Second, It helps build consensus among Asia, African countries, or international legal issues in cyberspace, and contribute wisdom and solutions to international rules of law in cyberspace, thus improving the participation and representation of Asian African countries in relevant international processes. Under this item, China kindly suggests that ARCO place its emphasis on discussions of state sovereignty and internet freedom, peaceful use of cyberspace, and prevention of cyberspace militarization, international cooperation in combating cyber crimes, and development and applications of international rules for cyberspace. Those issues are most important legal issues related to the formulation of the applicable international law norms and international order in cyberspace. China is looking forward to views from distinguished delegations, and here I would like to share our views on the 4 issues listed in the explanatory note attached to this new agenda item. First, on cyber security and cyber freedom, the Geneva Declaration of Principle adopted at the World Summit or the Information Society in 2003 clearly states that policy authority for internet-related public policy issues is the sovereignty right of states. The UN Group of Governmental Experts on Information Security in its 2013 report declared that state sovereignty and international norms of principle that flow from sovereignty apply to state conducts of ICT-related activities and to their jurisdiction over ICT infrastructure with their territory. We fully agree that cyberspace is not global commons. The principle of state sovereignty and non-interference in other internal affairs enshrined in the UN Charter applies in cyberspace. Every country is entitled to manage cyber infrastructure and regulate cyber activities within its territory according to law, taking into account its national conditions and take necessary measures to prevent threat, disturbance, attacks, and sabotage to its critical infrastructures and information resources. China firmly objects any act that violates the principle of state sovereignty and non-interference in other internal affairs by using cyberspace to disturb or sabotage the fundamental system of other countries, instigate social unrest, or push regime change in other countries, etc. Meanwhile, every country should fully respect and safeguard freedom of expression and the other freedoms exercised online by its citizens in accordance with its domestic law, and strive to strike a balance between cybersecurity on the one hand and free flow of information and protection of individual rights on the other hand. Second, on peaceful use of cyberspace and prevention of the cyberspace militarization. In cyberspace, countries are connected with each other. Their interests converge, and this their will and woe. Mankind does not need a new battlefield in cyberspace. And a peaceful cyberspace is in the common interest of all countries. Countries should comply with non-use of force, peaceful resolution of disputes, and other principles enshrined in the UN Charter, and prevent ICTs from being used for purpose inconsistent with peaceful development. Countries should firmly oppose such acts as using cyberspace to carry out hostile activities or acts of aggression, or pose threats to international peace and security. In terms of international law, the principle of non-use force as the core principle of UN collective security system enshrined in the UN Charter is just cognizance of international law, while several different but exceptions to this principle. However, in recent years, there has been too much talk of making exceptions for cyber warfare or cyber self-defense, and the non-use of force principle has been to some extent marginalized. The risk of sliding towards the militarization of cyberspace deserves high attention of the international community. Third, on rules of international cooperation in combating cybercrime, China has taken note of Convention on Cybercrime formulated in 2001 by Council of Europe, which provides to some extent a valuable reference to the international legislation or cybercrime. But the convention is not suitable for a global legal cooperation framework due to its limits in both substantive and procedural rules, and its obvious deficiency in representativeness and inclusiveness as far as its regional drafting process and high threat. So, for accession and as concerned, China agrees to formulate international rules or cybercrime under the aegis of UN to promote international cooperation and supports the UN group of the governmental experts or cyberspace in furthering its work mandated by relative resolutions. Fourth, all the development and applications of rules of international legal rules for cyberspace. The international community has reached general consensus on the application of existing international law principles in cyberspace, but many detailed issues are yet to be clarified, such as internet global governance, cultural diversity in cyberspace, and human rights and development. China holds that every country is a stakeholder of international governance in cyberspace and is entitled to equal participation in formulation of international rules for cyberspace. The UN, as the most representative and authoritative international organization, is the best forum for discussing and setting norms and rules for cyberspace. We maintain that consistent application of international rules is vital and oppose double standards and selective application of international law in any form. It's not acceptable that a country use its domestic rules or cyberspace as international rules and impose them on other countries. Mr. President, China is looking forward to strengthening the communication and promoting mutual trust and cooperation with other ARCO member states or international legal issues in cyberspace, and is committed to joint efforts to establish the peaceful, safe, open, cooperative cyberspace. We wish to promote ARCO's role in this regard. Given the long-term nature and complexity of the issue of international law in cyberspace, we would to suggest the ARCO to keep the items on its regular agenda so as to promote continued and in-depth studies and discussions on these important items by its member states. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker on the list is Japan. Japan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first time for the question of cyberspace to be addressed as an agenda item at the ALCO annual session. But we are all aware, and as the Chinese delegate pointed out, this is not a new issue internationally. On the contrary, this has been widely discussed and debated, hot issue among the intergovernmental and non-governmental fora concerned today. Japan believes that the cyberspace serves as a basis for socio-economic activities of humanity, and that securing free flow of information in cyberspace is of Japan's basic policies. The international community is also striving to build a safe, reliable cyberspace by securing its openness and interoperability without states' excessive control or restriction, while giving due attention to strike a balance between the protection of privacy and assurance of security. Japan recognizes the risks against stable use of cyberspace as an urgent security issue that no single country can address by itself. Japan has been actively participating in the discussions on the scope of application of existing international law to cyberspace in the UN Cyber Group of Governmental Experts, GCE, under the First Committee of the General Assembly, and has recognized the need for further dissemination of the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime in order to address cyber crime in concert with the international community. Mr. President, to only briefly touch upon some of the topics proposed by China in its explanatory note. First, on sovereignty and freedom of cyberspace, in our view, a state where cyber infrastructures or persons using cyberspace are located can exercise territorial sovereignty over such infrastructures or persons. Freedom of expression and secrecy of correspondence, confidentiality of communication should be respected to the maximum extent possible as a fundamental human rights. However, these fundamental human rights are not guaranteed without limitations. If there are higher legal interests, they can be limited for the public welfare. Secondly, on peaceful use and militarization of cyberspace. Addressing various threats in cyberspace is an urgent issue in the international community. Application of existing international law should be further considered for the stable use of cyberspace. Moreover, states are encouraged to take confidence-building measures bilaterally and multilaterally to prevent unintended escalation that are not intended by parties. Thirdly, on cybercrime Budapest Convention, cybercrime is a transnational threat which needs to be tackled jointly by the international community. The Convention on Cybercrime of the Council of Europe, or the so-called Budapest Convention, is at present the only effective multilateral instrument on the use of cyberspace. We believe that if more countries harmonize their domestic legislation to the standards of the Budapest Convention, it will contribute greatly to the stable use of cyberspace. Japan participated in the negotiation process of the Budapest Convention and finally acceded to the convention in July 2012. We are currently the only party from the Asian region to this convention, but gradually more and more non-European countries are adopting the standard of Budapest Convention in their domestic legislations. Other non-European parties to the convention so far include US, Australia, the Dominican Republic, Panama, Mauritius. South Africa and Canada have also signed the convention. with respect a proposal to develop cyberspace convention at the UN level, we should be prudent so as not to duplicate the efforts to create something very similar to the Budapest Convention. There are many countries that are in need of urgent assistance in terms of cybercrime legislations and the capacity building of law enforcement agencies. Lastly, on the question of application of international law. International law has played a significant role in securing legal stability and predictability in the international community, and the application of international law to the use of cyberspace has been, as a matter of principle, agreed upon in the discussions in the United Nations. The question of how specific